Welcome, everyone, to the Fan Speak Network and our very first short slate strategy show. I am Meg. You can follow me on Twitter at Megzo8DFS. And I'm, of course, joined by my sibling, my brother, Steve. You can follow him at SteveOSpeak. This is our very first short slate strategy show because we both love playing the short slates on DraftKings and FanDuel. And Steve is coming off a massive week, won $7,000 in the $33 contest on DraftKings on Thanksgiving, won $50,000 in the big $15 on the early only Sunday, a total of $70,000 in the short slate. Massive day. Steve, I can't keep saying congrats enough. How are you coming off the high? How are you doing? Tell people how you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, it was obviously a great week. First Thanksgiving, and got there. I was a little worried with Lamb not doing enough, but 33 was a little smaller and did have Samuel in it, and just the right combo, and it was enough to keep me up there in fourth place. And then, of course, on Saturday, just really stacked that Jags Texans game and hammered running backs. Got Michael Pittman and the big guy Pat Freiermuth, who was very low owned.
That was
and
massive
just
leverage.
absolutely doubled up pretty much every other tight end on the short slate, and well above a lot of other tight ends. So yeah, it turned into a really nice early sweat, and was good for the rest of the day. So yeah, really good day.
Talk about the leverage of Pat Freiermuth, his ownership, and Pittman, the leverage play off of the chalky Jonathan Taylor. What was Pittman and Freiermuth's ownership in one early?
Yeah. And Taylor ended up getting, still kind of getting there, but this is DraftKings, and Taylor didn't have any catches. Pittman had a ton. I can't remember what it was, like 10 catches, 110, 115, something like that. Didn't get a touchdown, unfortunately. It still paid off in that one, but in just some other things I had him like full slate would have been nice for that touchdown. Having him, and he was like under 10% owned. I had Bijan Robinson in that lineup, and he was pretty low owned. I think only like 11% owned.
Yeah.
So him getting the touchdown rushing, the touchdown receiving, good all around day. Just missed the rushing bonus, but great all around day. And of course, Freiermuth didn't get a touchdown, but did get the 100-yard bonus.
Yeah,
nine catches, I believe it was. Just massive day on DraftKings. And he was like 3% owned in like the $15, and even in like some smaller field stuff, I don't even think he cracked 5%. So he was really big leverage play there.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we can't stop smiling and super pumped, and that's why we're going to be doing short slate article every Friday. Be up by every Saturday morning. We'll do an early only, an afternoon only. We're going to do a short slate early look every Thursday. So that's why I wanted to have you guys check it out this first time. And coming off Steve's big win, he wants you guys to join him in the $50 Redzone on DraftKings early on, afternoon only. So we're giving away one of each. We'll give two $50 tickets away today to people in the chat. People who have followed and subscribed. And so only say hi to a couple people in chat. Our guy, Andrew Robb. I love Andrew. He's a Washington fan, just like us, suffering through the season, just like us. But hey, we got a quarterback now. So he says congrats again, and a little HTTC, even though we stink. LOL. Tim has joined us in the chat many of times before. Tim, it's good to see you again. Love it. Oh, there we go. Freiermuth. Love it. Love it. And then, of course, we got our guy, Tom Strachan. Love Tom. He's been in the best ball streets with us all summer long. So it's good to see you in chat. And yeah, he makes a great point. The contest, the short slate contests are so fun because you can, try to approach it in different ways. There's so much content out there for the classic slate and simulators and everything. And there's obviously optimizers and everything for the short slates too. But what's so great about short slate is you can take all the information you gather for the week and kind of apply it in a different way. Don't you think, Steve? Why don't you, I'm entering names because we're going to do, so that's, I teased the drawing. What we're going to do is we're going to talk short slates general strategy for just a couple minutes. We'll do our first drawing. Then we're going to talk early only. Then we'll do our second drawing. And then if you want to stay for the afternoon only, I think you should, because we like the afternoon only. We got a big one, the NFC championship rematch of the
Yeah.
Eagles 49ers in the 4 p.m. only. So as I'm getting some names in, Tim did a left hand up. You gotta love that. Spunky Spectrum Sports. You can follow him on YouTube as well. The whole Zach Moss thing, we will get into that. So yeah, thank you guys all for joining us here. We'll get to a drawing soon, but soon, let me just tee you up, Steve. I mean, you and I both love short slates because you can approach it differently. So talk about some of the strategies that you kind of apply on short slate. You kind of alluded to it in your wins, but talk about them a little more in detail as I get some names in here.
Yeah. So, and obviously each one's going to be a little different. Last week it was the 10 games were broken up 6-4. This week it's 7-3. So it's a little different, especially for the afternoon, only 3 games. That's just like the Thanksgiving slate, obviously, without the whole ability to swap in between games. But yeah, so you have to approach it that way and kind of know what kind of field you're playing with. The thing last week, obviously, with so many key quarterbacks on Thanksgiving, on 2 on Friday and the night games, Herbert and Jackson and the Sunday night game, that especially early only, it really did seem like Stroud and Lawrence were the guys, and just given that matchup. So I all my early only were those 2 quarterbacks, and those were the ones that went off. And Lawrence was the one that won it with me, just because he was cheaper and allowed me to get up to like Pittman, the double higher quality running backs. That really is what did it. In helping me, and also more times when I played Stroud, I was pairing him with Tank, who's fine, but just not as robust as some other plays. And Tank was a little more expensive than Nico. So anyways, so a lot of it is that way that approach it, but you can also use it as just a natural pivot and hedge from what you do overall. Bringing up the one guy who mentioned, Zach Moss. These ownerships will condense, but sometimes a value is just too good of a value. And that's what I saw it in that game. Like, to me, it didn't matter what like Calvin Ridley's ownership was. I just wanted him. I had Calvin Ridley in almost everything. I had Patriots defense across the board in every contest. I thought they were the number 1 defense. I had Ramondre a lot. I kind of rotated Ramondre, Bijan, and 1 or 2 other backs, Najee being one. And just kind of went through, Derrick Henry being the other, and just kind of rotated those like 4 running backs and got off I saw that Jonathan Taylor was just going to be massive chalk overall. I figured he'd be overwhelming chalk in the short slate. So so I was really into Pittman and Downs. And Downs had 13 targets. He didn't get there from a fantasy points game, but the play was right. I mean, he had 13 targets, I believe it was. So, just kind of played it that way. And, but, it doesn't mean you go away from chalk. If Zach Moss is going to be in the situation that Jonathan Taylor was last week, and you think that in short slate he's going to be 50-60% owned, maybe you buy into that. Same with like Tyreek. We know Tyreek is in a great spot against Washington. We'll get into that more later. But if you think that his ownership just totally spikes off the board, still play it, because we see that eruption ability. We see that ability that he can put up a 40 burger. And, that is absolutely what you could need, even regardless of that price. Now, that price that he is going to need something like that, you're not going to get a buy with just like 20 points from him. But Moss obviously being a different scenario given his price range. But I think it is a little better to just kind of pick your 1 or 2 teams or 1 or 2 games to really go all in on. Doesn't mean you have to totally run it back. If you did the, say, afternoon slate, you wanted to load up on Rams. Obviously the Bills and Eagles are great, but you wanted Kyron Williams, you wanted Tyler Higbee. Didn't mean you wanted Cardinals. So, it doesn't always mean you have to run it back. You need to keep that in mind, even in shorter slates. And
like you said, you don't have to stay away from the chalky game. Everybody knew Dallas, Washington was a chalky game on Thanksgiving. Everybody knew Houston, Jacksonville was a chalky game for early only. You don't need to stay away from the chalky game, 4 p.m. You don't need to stay away from stacking Hurts or being on Hurts or Allen in that chalky game. Just find contrarian pieces or interesting, pivots around it. Obviously, like you said, you got some major contrarian pieces with like a Freiermuth at 4% ownership, or the pivots where you can say, okay, Moss in this case this week, or JT last week, I'll just pivot to Pittman. That's huge, because that's just massive leverage. If like you said, and it wasn't even that Jonathan Taylor failed last week. Zach Taylor might not even fail this week, but if Pittman goes off and you're getting a much lower ownership, those are the kind of things. Before we get into our first drawing, I think another thing you kind of talked about, like you said, those, don't be afraid of the chalk that you think is going to hit. That's absolutely fine. Don't be afraid of the game that could be chalky, but just finding those contrarian pieces and leverage plays. I think the other thing that you need to mention too, that don't be afraid to go overweight on a team if you think they're going to go crush. I mean, you had how many Dallas players in the Thursday slate? And again, that was a 3-game slate, but did you have 5, 4?
Well, I had 5 counting the defense. So
so you had Dak, Pollard, Lamb, Cooks, and Dallas defense.
Cowboys defense.
I mean, the onslaughts are absolutely viable in short slates, especially if they're a smaller short slate, like 3, 2, 3, even 4 games. If you see a team that is just going to massively, put up 40 points and can maybe do so through the defense too, you can absolutely play the quarterback, multiple skill positions, and a defense, and that's fine. And then, you might, just look for some kind of contrarian plays around that. And you were able to get that with even the run back in Curtis Samuel, I believe, was lower owned. And I can't remember the lower owned pieces because you obviously had McCaffrey, who everybody needed on Thursday night.
I had the cheap free square tight end in Kraft.
Yes, that's right.
But he ended up, while Laporta clearly outscored him, he outscored, Kittle, he outscored Ferguson.
Exactly.
He did enough for me there. But the Pollard thing was key because, and I had a lot of Detroit running backs, of course, and I was much more overweight on Montgomery than Gibbs, but Pollard clearly outscored both. And by doing that and having him with Dak, I'm guessing a lot of Pollard lineups weren't with Dak, weren't with double Dallas receivers. So, that right there helps make that a little bit, while they're all highly owned, of course, in the 3-game slate, it makes it a little bit more unique and, can be the same in these types of situations. And again, would have seen it last week if you were doing Bills, last week with Josh Allen. I mean, James Cook had a good game. We've seen that plenty of times where running back, especially the shorter the slate, the thinner the margins are, and especially if the price is not like too over the top. Like
can't be too afraid of it.
We'll get to it in the afternoon.
As you say, we're going to talk about it with
the good news is like Purdy is not like super expensive, so like Purdy and McCaffrey can still play. But like if McCaffrey and Hurts, like where the prices where they are, then maybe it's problematic because you kind of need Hurts to get McCaffrey's usage and vice versa. Right.
I think, price matters in all of it. But I mean, I'd say the summary points of what we really, really, really consider in short slate is don't be afraid to get creative. I mean, there's even times in 2 or 3 game slates that you can play the defense against your quarterback. You can do 2 tight ends. You could do 2 running backs from the same team. I mean, there could have been a world on Thursday where Gibbs and Montgomery both got there. They didn't, but there could have been a world where it happened, right? So like those are things you consider that you would never consider on a classic slate. I would never play this week. I'm not going to play Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren in the same lineup. But if it was a short slate, maybe if it's 2 games. So you can, exactly. So again, and price. So I think it allows you to really give yourself permission to get creative, do those things that are kind of breaking the rules of like what we typically do in classic slate. And that's what makes short slate so fun and unique, and finding unique edges. But again, don't be afraid to go away from the chalk game or chalk plays. If you think they're going to smash, don't be afraid to onslaught a team if you think they're going to smash. You just have to find some contrarian plays around that, and just 1 or 2. It's not like you have to go contrarian down the board. You just had a couple contrarian pieces in each lineup, right, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the one thing is like, don't always feel you have to take every, and again, it's each situation, but as we saw last week, Tank Dell was not the optimal play. Diggs and AJ Brown were not the optimal plays. You wanted the second receivers on those teams.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
And, is that always going to be the case? Is that going to be the case most of the time? No, but sometimes that's what you need. And if you're running multiple lineups, I would recommend doing one with that and just seeing if it gets you up there, because by doing that, it does, like I said, it allows, it can help allow you to get up to maybe a better receiver or a better running back for that flex position from another team instead of, taking that 4,500 receiver that you just hope luck boxes into the end zone or something like that.
Right. A couple people in chat, Tim loved the Fryermuth call with Canada gone. We were both, like everybody in the fantasy world, calling for Canada to be gone. And
then the other thing with that is there was a lot of data. I mean, you watch the Bengals. I mean, Kincaid had killed them. A couple other teams had hit Cincy hard with tight ends recently, and it was just like, this is a guy, we know his talent when healthy the last couple of years. It's been a couple of weeks since he's been back, and new offense coordinator, give it a whirl, at that price, why not?
Yeah, and they make a good point. Mostert in a chain would be, I can never pronounce if it's a chain or I don't know, but Mostert a chain would be tough to pull off. But yeah, it
would have worked Denver against Denver. They both were.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If it was the slate against Denver. So yeah, again, it's context means everything in every aspect of fantasy, but especially in short slate, context to, price and the stack. And if you need to bring back and all that stuff matters. Any other, as I bring over the wheel for our first drawing, any other like short slate strategies that you really, really try to lean into, or that you think maybe the field isn't doing enough of?
I think the biggest thing is just getting contrarian in those one or two spots is the biggest thing, instead of like trying to really get contrarian.
Yeah.
And then just trying to and one thing I know I have this issue even when I like a game is, and yes, sometimes you do want to get really overweight, but that's like the really short slates, like the 3, maybe 4 game. But when it's like 6 or 7, like the early only typically are, I don't think you have to. Like I had 3, I never had more than 3 Jaguars or Texans in a lineup.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where you want to be. And I kind of have 3 on one side and 1 or 2 from the other. Right. And that was it. So no more than like 4, sometimes 5 from that game. That's kind of where I'd go say from that, just because as bad as we can talk about how scoring is, and especially, and this is more DraftKings, FanDuel is a little different because we are so touchdown dependent over there.
Sure.
But DraftKings with catches, with the 100-yard bonuses, when you have those opportunities there are a lot of guys who can get like fantasy viable scores just by, pulling together a bunch of, Fryermuth didn't have a touchdown, but he got 100 yards, 9 catches. Even if he was a receiver, that was a great fantasy score. Even if he was priced 6,000, he would have been a great fantasy option. Obviously he was a tight end and priced under 3,000, making him just the fantastic fantasy option. So just making that kind of point, like we just should look at volume opportunities and knowing that it's DraftKings and that the points and just getting that yardage are so key, and just focus on that more than anything.
And I think you made a great point. Like the shorter the slate, the more it allows you to onslaught. If it's a 2, 3, even 4, maybe like Thanksgiving was 3, obviously, that, I think you can have a permission to onslaught a little bit more. And like you said, on a short slate, like the 1 o'clock was, you're not really looking, even though the offenses were pretty condensed, you're not really looking to onslaught when there's 7 games. And that's kind of what we'd probably be considering the breakout this week, because obviously the early only has a lot more games than the afternoon only. Let's do our first drawing here, Steve. And I put the names that were, kind of, like, subscribe. And of course, if you're watching and haven't, like and subscribe, like this episode, subscribe to the FanSpeak Network, because we will be doing this show every Thursday. We have a live NFL betting show every Thursday at 3:00. So we'll be getting to that shortly. I do an NBA show with the same guys, Spread and Tyler. They're awesome. They know their stuff. They know their NBA. They know their NFL. They're crushing on the NBA and NFL betting card. And so we do that on Tuesdays. And Steve and I do an underdog show every Tuesday doing the Battle Royale. So plenty of stuff on the FanSpeak Network, and then fanspeak.com. Everything's free. Of course, we got the NFL betting card that we update for every slate. And then, of course, we have content for Underdog. And now we're doing it for Classic Slate, but we're going to lean in. We love these short slates. We're going to lean into that. So check that all out. We'll do our first drawing. You have to be in here to say, hey, I'm here. And then you can DM me and we will get your PayPal information to PayPal you $50 to join Steve in the $50 Red Zone. So I'm hitting the wheel, Steve, for the first. We'll see if they're in there. These are the people that were kind enough to like, subscribe, retweet, and we got it going here. And let's see who we come up with. Okay, I don't know if Dean's in here. He's one of our NFL draft friends. We love Dean Kindig. If Dean is in here, let me know. We'll give it a minute. If he's not, then we will spin again, because not everybody may have joined live for the show, even though they were, again, kind of be part of the contest. So we'll give a minute for that. But why don't you talk early about the 1 p.m.
Sure.
only or early only slate this week, the number of games, who you're looking to onslaught. I think I have a feeling Andrew will probably agree. Probably a lot of Dolphins against the Washington defense, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's like I said, we have 7 games in the early only slate. We will have to watch some weather. On the East Coast, Midwest, there's a lot of weather concerns in some of these games. So in Washington being one of them, Pittsburgh and Jets seem to be the other ones right now. So that is something to keep in mind. But yes, Miami going against this Washington defense. They fired Jack Del Rio and the secondary coach, but I don't think it matters. Quarterback after quarterback are having like their best game of their year, if not career, against Washington defense. If Mac Jones got to play Washington every week, I'm pretty sure he'd still be the Patriots quarterback. And it's just, they're giving up touchdowns and receptions at an alarming rate. But it's also worth noting they're getting killed by running backs at an alarming rate, and both rushing and through the air. And this is why Pollard was viable last week. This is also why Mostert and or potentially a chain. We'll have to see the whole injury report, how that breaks out. There could be viable this week because both sides are getting there. Both rushing and receiving are getting there against Washington's defense, particularly backs who catch the ball. And Kenneth Walker only had 1 catch in the game against Seattle, and he had a 60-yard touchdown. So, yeah, it's bad. And so it's expensive, but you can load up. And on the flip side, you can take some Washington pieces back. It's tough to know what receiver it's going to be, but most of them are fairly cheap. Especially Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, tight end Logan Thomas, Brian Robinson still gets a lot of work, a lot of goal line work. They just weren't around the goal line a lot against that vaunted Cowboys defense. But that could change this week, obviously. So a lot to like from that game, I think. And that would be the primary one to stack up from kind of like both sides. But there are some other games that I think you can look at. Detroit.
Okay, hold that thought. Let's get to the other games in a minute. And why don't we do both spins right now? Let's try to give both tickets away so that way we can bring over the DraftKings board and kind of look at the pricing too as you're talking about this and kind of build like almost like a shell for each slate. So, excuse me, I'm going to spin the wheel again and see if we can get a winner here. This is for the early only Red Zone, $50 Red Zone, joining Steve. I don't know if I saw Chris in the chat, but he was, I know, kind enough to retweet us on Twitter. Chris, if you're in the chat, let us know. And then, so you were saying, Steve, that the other teams were Lions.
The Lions Saints game, I think, would be the next one that you could maybe take pieces from both sides. Still fully waiting to hear which Saints receivers will be healthy. But we've seen the Lions defense, which seemed much stronger early in the year. The Packers on a short week banged up themselves, had no problem moving the ball on them. Bears even had kind of no problem moving the ball on them. The Lions defense has had some issues of late. Alvin Kamara, I think, is in a really good spot, could get peppered with targets. Sounds like Olave might be back. We'll have to see, of course, but definitely like the Lions side. It's a weird one. I like both sides, but I don't know if I love Jared Goff as a quarterback, just because he feels kind of maxed out around 25, 26 DraftKings points, and you still probably might need higher unless you're in a really small field tournament. But I love Amon-Ra, Dave Montgomery, Gibbs, Laporta, all in play. You can take shots on the cheaper receivers like Reynolds or Jameson Williams, even Khalif Raymond. So there are enough pieces around that you can do a skinny stack from this game, like maybe 2 Lions, 1 Saint, but maybe not even have this as like your primary with a quarterback involved, just because I don't necessarily love the quarterback side, but
Okay,
I
we
do
have a
like
question. Go ahead.
pieces
Sorry
from this
about
game.
Okay, I like that. And we have a question in chat, but let's try spinning the name. It's one more time here. See if we can get a winner. We want to give $50 away. We want you guys to join Steve in the chat or in the $50 contest. Our guy Felix, he's another best ball guy. Don't know if he is in the show, but it is Felix. If you're in the show, let us know. We will get a winner. I am determined to get a winner. Because I know some of these people in here are in our chat. So we will get a winner, but we want you guys joining us in the chat. We are so grateful that you're here joining us in the chat. And again, we will be doing this each and every Thursday at 2:00 as an early look. Let me spin the name again. If Felix comes in, we'll give him the second one. If not, we'll just keep firing away here. Scott Stewie, he's another one. I see him on Twitter all the time. He's always retweeting our stuff. I mean, it might be Andrew and Tim, like he said, that are in there. I mean, they just might, be. Let's see, because these were all the people that subscribed, liked, and retweeted. So I might just take it down to you guys. If anybody else is in the chat, say hi. Okay, let's see here. I think our guy Dylan's in the chat. I know Tom was in the chat earlier. I love that. We'll keep it easy here, folks. We're going to get this thing because we got to finish talking about this. Tim, my friend, it looks like you are the first winner for $50. Please DM me. And yeah, see, we got Dylan still in here. So Tim, DM me on Twitter. I believe we're following each other. All you have to do is DM me your PayPal email, and I will PayPal you $50 so that you can join Steve in the $50 Red Zone. Pick early only, pick afternoon only, whichever slate you like. So congrats, Tim, and let's spin again. Get that so then we can focus here on breaking this out here. But we are grateful to you guys for joining us for our very first episode. Hopefully we get more and more people joining us and each and every week. And hopefully we'll do more of these giveaways, get some more winners. Dylan, you are our other winner for the early only, afternoon only. You pick, join Steve in the $50 Red Zone. DM me. I will send you could just DM me your PayPal. Andrew can have mine. I only do FanDuel. I'd love to give you. Andrew's my guy. He's our Washington friend, but you can use it on FanDuel too. That's fine. This is about getting in that early only, afternoon only, having some fun. So just as long as you're using that $50 and getting in on that early only or afternoon only short slate action. So DM me your information. I will PayPal you. Dylan and Tim. Andrew, hopefully you win next time because we appreciate you being in here. So I really appreciate it. Now it's time to seriously focus here, and I'm going to pull over, Steve, the DraftKings so that we can really just look at the slate now. Okay. You kind of broke down the stacks that you may want to target, but let's get serious here and talk about like maybe building a little bit of a shell here. Yeah. So we talked about the 2 games that you might be interested in stacking with obviously the Washington, Miami and the New Orleans, Detroit. What other like are must-have pieces? And then we'll answer that first and then I'll get to like maybe more value contrarian pieces.
So what I will say is from a perspective of, I do think this week there is a little bit more depth at the quarterback position because I think last week, like I said, it was Lawrence and Stroud to me seemed way over, where both quarterbacks from the Miami Washington game, Tua and Howell. I mean, Howell is throwing the ball over 40 times a game. We've seen multiple high 20s, like low 30 games, and that's what some kind of
the game script will be there this week too.
Yeah, exactly. And weaker touchdown efficiency. And we just saw Miami lose one of the best pass rushers, sadly,
Very
to an
sadly, yeah.
Achilles
Hmm.
injury. So, yeah, I mean, I think Miami's going to win, but big. But Hal's going to have to throw the ball 40 plus times once again.
Yep.
So, but I mean, we have Stroud and Herbert at the top of this board, and people get fearful about the New England defense, but Herbert's another quarterback who's throwing the ball, high 30s, low 40 times a game, highly efficient. Him and Keenan Allen are just such a tremendous combo. So I don't think he should be ignored in this type of slate, and it will likely come in very contrarian in this type of slate. So
Oh,
I just want
absolutely.
to mention that.
Sure.
And the Stroud and even Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, they've not had to get there in this run. They've not had to really push in this run. But Houston has become kind of a pass funnel of late. Like a lot of teams are throwing the ball quite a bit on them. They had that shootout with Tampa. Bengals was turning kind of into a shootout. Obviously, last week with the Jags, their run defense has gotten a lot more stout. ETN had a ton of carries, couldn't do much with it. So I really think that and we even saw Russ run for a touchdown. So if you need a cheaper option and don't like Hal, Russ Wilson would be the one, short slate only. And this isn't a case where like Herbert and Stroud and Tua are not getting like 35 plus, but they're just getting high 20s. And, this is exactly what happened the last week of best ball finals last year. Russ got 25 points and ended up winning the DraftKings Million and Maker
Right.
because
Yeah.
he was like QB5 and,
Yeah.
just able to do it. And could be something similar here from a price savings standpoint. So
Sure. A couple question in chat from Andrew. What's your thoughts on Baker or Minshew as a lesser owned QB? And then I want to wrap up QB so then we can quickly get to, because we still want to touch on afternoon only, and I have a live show at 3 too. So I want to make sure we have time to talk about the early only kind of contrarian plays and pivots as well. So to speak to the Baker Minshew, would you consider them? Because I do see how that could be a consideration based on the defenses they're playing.
Baker's in the afternoon slate.
Oh, okay, Baker's in the afternoon. Sorry.
Yeah.
Minshew is in the early only.
Yeah,
so we'll talk
Minshew's
about Baker in a minute when we go there. Minshew against the Tennessee pass funnel defense priced at 5.3K. Any interest there?
Yeah, Minshew and actually Pickett, I would say, is kind of in the similar spot. They're both really bad passing defenses. Pickett should have had touchdown to Deontay Johnson. They should have reviewed it. They didn't last week. Almost had 300 yards. So yeah, I mean there's some value there. And Minshew, we've seen him run for some touchdowns already. So maybe can get there. Downs and Pittman are two good weapons. But Moss, we've seen them lean heavily on Moss also. So I don't hate it. I think I'd only do it a couple times. I wouldn't go too much overweight on it.
Right.
Just because
but they're
considerations.
They're considerations. Okay.
I just think there are some really good quarterbacks.
Right. I do think that quarterbacks we were talking about in the Miami Washington game, if you want to do Stroud or Herbert, or in the Detroit, you could approach it just attacking the Detroit game. So now let's talk about either value pieces or contrarian pieces that you think could help build around, say, a Miami Washington lineup. So for instance, I'm going to, if you don't mind, as we're doing this, put in a Miami Washington stack. And then you can tell me maybe some contrarian pieces to put around, like basically like a little shell,
Yeah.
So tell me some contrarian pieces or cheap pieces that you're considering on this slate.
Well, I do. I think I would lean into the Zach Moss versus Tennessee. Their Tennessee run defense has not been as strong lately.
Okay.
And I just think Zach Moss's usage was just phenomenal without Taylor before, and he was just insane. So I do like him. I actually like doing Moss and Najee Harris going cheap.
I know you were going to talk. You wanted to talk about. You also don't mind doing what you did with Dak and doing like a Tua, Mostert, Hill lineup as well, right? So would you consider three lineups or three running backs?
I definitely would consider 3 running backs this week, and that would be one of them. There are other ones that I really like. I like Bijan. I like. Henry is definitely playable as well. I don't mind Ramondre again against the Chargers. Ramondre is getting his usage
Mm-hmm.
is really spiking, getting a ton of catches also, which again on DK is just huge. And even though, like I said, Houston's run defense has been better, Javonte Williams has seen his usage just really go up the last 3-4 games. So I don't mind him as well. He's not getting touchdowns, which is worrying, but other than that, his usage numbers are really, really strong.
So tell me what. Go ahead. Sorry about. Go ahead.
I don't think this is necessarily a week you have to do 3. The Mostert thing is, especially, I want to hear if we hear something like how much the chain is going to get utilized, and
Right. We need to
that
follow
kind of
up on news on
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So you're not like married to the I need to get a chain in every, or excuse me, Mostert. You first of all want to hear the news about a chain, the usage, and how that should kind of be utilized this week. But especially if Mostert could be low owned, you have interest, but you're not going to try to force that in every Tua lineup. But I built one shell just to give an idea of what Steve's talking about. Tua, Mostert, Tyreek Hill, running it back with Jahan Dotson, who I think might be one of the lowest owned of the 3 main. Curtis Samuel's coming off the big game. Everybody loves McLaurin. Dotson still quietly has, it's been a roller coaster this season, but he did get 6 targets last week. So, I definitely think he'll be the lowest one. I put in a cheap filler defense, talked about the eating the chalk with the Zach Moss and going back to Harris for a Pittsburgh play. That leaves 2 spots, $4,200. And of course you could pivot, and take out Mostert. You could, I'm sure some people will try to do like a double stack with Hill too. Would that be something you'd be interested in? I mean, I absolutely see that working. You just are going to have to but it leaves around the same. If you did a Tua, Hill, Waddle, Dotson stack, 2 cheaper running backs, cheap defense, you're left with around 4,000, give or take. Yeah. So I don't mind that too, as like kind of a starting place. And then of course, I'm guessing that Howe will come in lower owned than Tua, and you save, about $1,000 there. So, you can save a little money. You could honestly still do the double stack or just do it Howe, Hill. I took out Dotson, Howe, Hill, McLaurin, something along those lines. And these are just kind of fun ways. And that's what these are just early look kind of building blocks, like as what we consider as kind of our early strategies for early only, afternoon only, and early looks at how we might kind of break it out. But we will have everything in detail, our favorite plays, our favorite stacks, values, contrarian plays, fades, everything in a early only and afternoon only strategy up on fanspeak.com on Saturday morning. So any other like pivots or changes or things you just want to see and play before we look at the afternoon only slate, Steve?
The only thing I'd say is as much as I like Laporta, and I do think he can really run away with the tight end scoring.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to pay down this week at tight end. If you get a touchdown similar to Kraft, you could be golden.
So. Yeah, and there's multiple down here that I don't mind. Everett, they are depleted of weapons. You could use Logan Thomas as your run back, go back to Freiermuth, so there's definitely some options, and then some options even cheaper that might be a little more dart throws. But okay, any final thoughts before we pull up the 4:00 slate and talk 4:00 slate?
No.
Okay, let's go talk. As I'm pulling that up, Steve, why don't you take a kind of the broad view at the 4:00 slate and how you think you're going to be approaching it. We talked about that, about how we love the Miami-Washington game. That might be what we build around. And then you talked about some of the other plays you're considering around it. And again, this is kind of our first look, at these short slates, but talk about like what you're considering. Obviously, we got the NFC Championship rematch with the Eagles, 49ers in Philly. That's going to be massive. I don't see how you could possibly fade McCaffrey. You really would have to be rooting for him to fail, and he's the best player in fantasy. So I think most of my lineups will have McCaffrey. How are you handling this?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the question, because it feels tough to get McCaffrey, Hurts, and then like say AJ Brown, or even if you go down from AJ Brown and a couple of these other top receivers, But then if you're fading one of these guys, you could get a guy who just absolutely explodes, and really nukes the rest of the slate. And I'll start off with what Andrew said earlier. Like, this is where Mayfield could be interesting, because if Hurts doesn't have the 2 touchdown rushing game, cheaper quarterback like Mayfield, and Stafford, even though he had his best game of the year, goes against a really tough Cleveland defense. So it's like either kind of Purdy or Mayfield, and Mayfield is 600 lower than Purdy. So
5.5, yeah.
yeah, so that could be a really, really good way, if you're doing like a Mayfield Evans stack, that way you're ensuring.
And that's one where you certainly, unless you feel like Adam Thielen's going to have a big bounce back, you certainly don't have to force a bring back, correct? In your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to. Again, this is only 3 games, so
sure.
if you do think, and Tampa is such a pass funnel, as we saw.
That's true. What happened? I didn't get a chance to rewatch that game. What on earth happened to Adam Thielen in that game? It sounds like he just got a couple targets. Like, it looks like it was just 3 targets, 1 catch. So, if you think there's a bounce back spot, he's priced at 6.6K. So if you started it, Mayfield, Evans, Thielen, McCaffrey, you'd obviously probably want to get some more exposure to that Philly game. Would you want to run it back with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith? I mean, would you prioritize spending up for A.J. Brown? Devonta Smith has quietly, his usage, and I know we're still waiting to hear on Goddard, correct?
Yeah.
But his usage really spikes.
Good, I don't think.
Okay. Because his usage really spikes without Goddard. And you can see that he's gotten 8 targets in the last 2 games. And of course, last week he had a touchdown, 26.6 DK points. I kind of like Devonta Smith to save about $1,500. What about you?
Yeah. But what I will say here is I wouldn't force an Adam Thielen bring back if it's costing you like a Devonta Smith.
Right.
Because I would rather have, just straight up, I'd rather have Devonta Smith than an Adam Thielen. And because what it comes down to is the decision point is like, if I'm doing McCaffrey, I still want Kyren Williams, even in that tough matchup. And especially if I'm doing Mayfield Evans, because then I'm probably not doing Rashard White. I mean, you could do all 3 and just total jam and hope that that's a smash, and it could be. I mean, Carolina is bad. We know they're bad. So, but and even then, he's 6,000. So those are the kind of things you don't have to force bring backs.
Right.
McCaffrey and Samuel and Debo were amazing in San Francisco.
You didn't win any Seattle.
You didn't win any Seattle.
Exactly. Exactly. No, that's an excellent point. And in chat, they talked about Evans' season. I know he's just incredible this year. I drafted him a good bit in best ball, but I wish I drafted him even more. Andrew talks about Devonta Smith could be interesting you could stack him with Hurts and fade Brown. I think that's interesting. His role, like Adam or Andrew just mentioned, like we talked about, his role is much better and usage is much better when Goddard is out. And if it's not sounding like Goddard's in. So this is kind of one shell, Steve. And, I did exactly what you said. I did Mayfield, McCaffrey, still did Kyren Williams, Devonta Smith. So you get that McCaffrey, Devonta Smith skinny. You got Mayfield, Evans. I did Brown's defense, just kind of the best defense on the slate. And this is another thing, like some would say, well, I got the running back. Why would I play the running back against the defense? It's short slate. You absolutely could do that. So this shell is interesting. You'd have to go really cheap at tight end in this one. So, but you could do like a Kate Otten and double stack it, and I won't go farther than that, but any other thoughts on this build before we maybe look at one more before we get out of here?
Well, and just what I'd say, especially in this kind of build, when you're not playing Hurts, because we're kind of saying that he doesn't, just totally smash.
Right.
Play the 49ers defense. I mean, this is the cheapest you're going to see them because they're playing Philly.
Right.
And, Smith can definitely still get there. Hurts can still have a above average game.
Right.
And Smith have a great game. And,
that's a great point.
And the 49ers defense, especially since they made the young move, since they've gotten healthy, coming off the bye, they've been great. So they've, I think, had 5 sacks in every game since coming off the bye. I mean, some of that is who they've played, but you can, and the Eagles, Hurts is taking sacks at a much more alarming rate this year. He's turning the ball over at a much more alarming rate this year. So, that can definitely be a way to play it and approach it.
And not only is this is the cheapest we're going to see 49ers. It's also probably going to be the lowest owned that we'd see the 49ers too, because I doubt many people are going to be that comfortable playing the 49ers against Hurts and the Eagles, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, whatever source you use for ownership projections, check ownership projections. Close to, there's not really for the short slates, but you can kind of apply it to, this is the ownership projections on the main slate, and this is how it'll probably apply to the short slate of early only or afternoon only. Did you want to do a quick Hertz or Purdy just to see some quick pivots? I think then you'd have to ditch Evans. So if you think Evans has a big game, that's tough, but it would be really hard to get McCaffrey and Hurts without, ditching Evans and maybe even Kyron Williams. So, if you did like Hurts, McCaffrey, Devonta, you could even leave 49ers defense or change the defense. I'll leave it in there for now in the interest of time. You're left with 3,800. You may need to go down at running back and do more like a Ford or a White, something along those lines, right?
Well, and this is the other thing. If you are doing Hurts, I know it's crazy, but you actually don't have to stack them, especially given the price of those receivers.
Right.
Because, Brown, we know, can, if he has anything approaching his last 3 games, even that Dallas game, 19.6 at that price in this kind of slate is probably not cutting it.
Right.
That was fine for your regular fantasy or your best ball to have that kind of day. But in this kind of slate, that's just not cutting it.
Right.
And even Devonta Smith, the last week is great, but if it's what he did against Kansas City, and I know he's 1 yard away from the bonus, or Dallas, or what he's done for honestly most of the year, not cutting it at that price. And that if Hurts has 2 rushing touchdowns and makes him the king of the quarterback this week for the short slate, that can. I know it's scary to do, but if he's getting 20 points from running, then like he did a week ago, there's nothing wrong with not stacking him, especially if you say, I want McCaffrey, I want Kyron Williams,
right,
I want Rashard White, because Panthers are getting absolutely hammered by running backs,
right. Or you can even bring back a couple on the San Francisco side. You could do like a McCaffrey, Debo, Hurts, and still get multiple.
Maybe get Debo, because what we didn't talk about is the Eagles secondary is getting killed by everyone.
Right.
Everyone.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. And we saw it last week. Gabe Davis was the one you wanted out of Buffalo, but obviously I know Allen partially got there with the massive QB one day with 2 touchdowns and his, yardage on the ground. But he shredded them for over 300 yards, I believe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think you could do something like this, or as you said earlier, just before we got here, I think you could do something like this and do like a Purdy McCaffrey, if you really wanted to hammer that game. I don't see anything wrong with something like this. Maybe then you don't onslaught the defense and you pivot to a different defense like the Browns or Rams or something like that. But, you could do like a Purdy, McCaffrey, Debo, or if you're more bullish on Ayuk, and Devonta Smith and or AJ Brown, and you're still left with 4,000. I think you could do something like that. That's probably the script that San Francisco wins, but I think you and I both think that San Francisco is going to win, and Eagles have gotten some lucky bounces, and I would not be surprised if San Francisco wins. And I do think the one thing with Purdy, you probably do want, I'm not saying a rule, but you with him, you do want at least 1, if not 2, because he's just such a distributor, and an excellent one at that in the Kyle Shanahan offense. So we have 2 more minutes before we get out of here, Steve. And again, this was our first time breaking down a short slate early look. We're going to be doing this every Thursday at 2:00, short slate early look for each of the early only, afternoon only, and then we will have a full early only, afternoon only survey with all of it after we get more research, after we get more ownership information, injury information. Then we can really paint the picture of how we see that we're going to play each of our short slates. But this has been a fun first show. We had 2 giveaways again, to Tim and to Dylan. DM me. We'll get that $50 for everybody joining the chat. Andrew, Tim, everybody that joined, Dylan, Tom, we appreciated that. This is so fun. And we were going to do this every week, and we'll make it a live show every week so we can have some conversations about the slate, which is really fun. But, any final thoughts for this afternoon slate before we get out of here?
Yeah, just like I said, 3 games. So this is where you can really overstack a certain game, but and don't and this is also where don't worry about maybe the defense against your quarterback or
Yep.
defense against the team where you have multiple offensive pieces. Like you mentioned, Browns defense. Maybe you do have Kyron Williams and Higbee or something like
Right.
that, but you still have the Browns defense. So yeah, don't worry about those kind of rules that we would hate in regular DFS.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think you summarized that perfectly. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us for this first episode. We look forward to doing this each and every week, Thursday at 2:00. So be sure to join us every Thursday at 2:00 and check out the article each Saturday morning. We really appreciate it. Like this episode, subscribe to the FanSpeak Network. And if you are into NFL betting, we have an NFL betting card show that I'm jumping on in literally 2 minutes. NFL betting card live with Spread Astaire, Tyler Hicks. They are super sharp. They know their stuff. They're crushing in both the NFL and NBA streets. So be sure to check out that if you want to get some NFL betting card information. And yeah, it's been a blast. We'll be back next Thursday. So for Steve, I'm Meg. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next Thursday.